Welcome to this explainer. Look, we need to urgently debunk a massive, incredibly costly industry rumor going around regarding the 2026 EPA chiller regulations. Just imagine budgeting millions of dollars for facility upgrades, only to find out months later that you're risking hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and facing completely stranded assets. And all of that based on a simple misunderstanding of federal policy. There's a ton of noise out there right now, but today we're going to strip all that away and look strictly at the reality of what's actually happening. My goal here is to give you a clear, comprehensive roadmap of the facts so you can protect both your facility operations and your bottom line. Let's get right into it.
So, you've probably seen the headlines floating around. Things like EPA delays chiller rules or AIM Act paused. This narrative caught fire recently, spreading like wildfire through trade show gossip and quickly skimmed industry newsletters. The whole thing stems from an EPA proposed reconsideration that was published back in October 2025. People saw the word reconsideration in an email subject line and immediately jumped to the conclusion that facility operators were getting a free pass for 2026. You could practically feel the collective sigh of relief across the industry. But unfortunately, that relief was entirely misplaced. Spoiler alert, you are absolutely not getting a free pass.
Here is the absolute reality. The AIM Act and its enforcement are not paused. That October 2025 reconsideration was incredibly narrow in its scope. Operators who are specifying high GWP, or global warming potential, chillers right now, basically assuming the rules just vanished into thin air, are taking on severe, unpriced financial and operational risks. Think about what happens if you install a massive piece of infrastructure under the totally false assumption that it's exempt. The rules that survive this narrow reconsideration are exactly the ones most likely to trigger immediate and strict enforcement.
Let's talk about the carve-outs, because the reality is actually quite stark. The proposed reconsideration only delays compliance dates or provides temporary relief for very specific, highly specialized subsectors. We're primarily talking about semiconductor manufacturing and certain deep-cold storage warehouses. Those are industries where alternative, low GWP technologies simply aren't mature enough yet to meet extreme temperature demands without disrupting critical global supply chains. But if you're running general industrial process chillers operating above -22°F or standard commercial HVAC chillers, you remain squarely in the crosshairs of the 2026 rules. You did not get a delay.
For pretty much everyone else, a strict 700 global warming potential cap on new industrial process chillers operating above -22°F is fully enforced. So, what does this cap mean practically for your next procurement cycle? It means legacy refrigerants that the industry has relied on for literally decades, like R410A and R134A, are officially out. Moving forward, you're going to be making the jump to compliant choices like R454B, R32, or CO2. And keep in mind, this isn't just a simple fluid swap. Transitioning to these new refrigerants often involves handling mildly flammable A2L classifications, which changes basically everything from your equipment design to your facility's core safety protocols.
Now this is where it gets wild. The regulatory net expansion here is drastic, and it's about to catch a lot of smaller facilities totally off guard. Under the HFC Leak Repair and Management Rule, which kicks in January 1, 2026, the compliance threshold drops from 50 pounds of refrigerant all the way down to just 15 pounds. That's a massive 70% threshold drop. We aren't just talking about giant central plants anymore. This single change pulls thousands of mid-capacity industrial chillers, standard rooftop units, and small process refrigeration systems right into strict leak detection, mandatory repair, and rigorous record-keeping requirements for the very first time. And that ties right into the new automatic leak detection mandates. For massive systems containing 1,500 pounds or more of refrigerant, the oversight gets even tighter. You're required to install automatic leak detection on new appliances within 30 days of installation starting in 2026. And if you have existing systems in this massive size category, you're forced to retrofit them with ALD by January 1, 2027. Beyond just buying the sensors, you have to perform strict annual calibration audits. It's a significant logistical hurdle that requires coordinating specialized, certified technicians and scheduling planned downtime, really just to prove to the EPA that your alarms actually work.
Okay, you're going to want to pay close attention to this one because this is perhaps the most underappreciated trap of the entire 2026 regulatory framework, the retrofit or retire rule. Starting in 2026, if a system leaks persistently and you fail to repair it within the mandated timeframes, the EPA doesn't just slap you with a fine, they actually have the legal authority to effectively force a total asset replacement or a mandatory retrofit. Imagine having to scrap a newly purchased multi-million-dollar chiller just a few years into its 20-year life cycle simply because of chronic leaks. The EPA is literally dictating your capital planning schedule now, completely overriding your facility's budget timeline.
To truly understand the financial avalanche coming for non-compliant facilities, you have to realize that the AIM Act borrows its enforcement power directly from the Clean Air Act. This means you are facing a relentless, per-day, per-violation penalty structure. The inflation-adjusted civil penalty maximum currently sits at a staggering $69,733 per day per violation. It's an absurdly specific number, I know, but the financial devastation it represents is very, very real.
And honestly, you can rack up these violations in the most surprisingly mundane ways. We're talking about missing a repair deadline by a single day, having incomplete maintenance records, skipping a required inspection, accidentally using an uncertified technician, or just mishandling the disposal paperwork. Because of that per-day compounding structure we just discussed, a single chronic leak condition left unaddressed for 30 days across any of these violation categories can easily spiral into a massive six-figure exposure before your accounting department even gets the very first repair invoice. Let this really sink in for a second. Facilities relying on spreadsheets updated after the fact are materially exposed. The days of a dusty clipboard and a messy Excel file are totally over. Federal enforcement now operates through modern, data-driven EPA audits, automated compliance reviews, and increasingly whistleblower reports. If your service vendors cannot produce real-time, circuit-level refrigerant records detailing the exact additions, recoveries, and repairs on demand during a surprise audit, your facility is wide open to massive compliance failures and sweeping financial liability.
Section 2, the State Wildcard. Subtitle: When Federal Rules Are the Least of Your Worries. Even if you completely master the EPA's federal framework and have your documentation in absolute perfect order, state-level environmental regimes operate on entirely independent and often much stricter timelines. These state agencies are aggressively pursuing their own climate goals, and they are definitely not waiting around to see what happens with any federal reconsiderations. In California, for example, the Air Resources Board operates under a terrifying legal standard known as strict liability. This means a prohibited act constitutes a violation regardless of your intent or the immense care you took to avoid it. "I didn't know," or "it was an accident" are no longer valid legal defenses. Accidental leaks, or simply missing an annual emissions report deadline, can trigger penalties reaching up to $500,000 annually. You cannot plead ignorance here. These strict liability frameworks are already fully enforced and actively penalizing operators. Just look at the massive contrast between federal standards and state ones, like in New York. While the EPA evaluates refrigerants using a 100-year global warming potential standard, New York adopts a much more aggressive 20-year timescale. By measuring the environmental impact over just 20 years, short-lived climate pollutants look significantly worse. This means a specific refrigerant might be perfectly acceptable federally, but carry a restrictively high regulatory value in New York. This is a huge wake-up call for multi-state operators. A single facility located in a highly regulated state can effectively dictate the procurement and compliance reality for your entire corporate portfolio. So, how do we actually navigate this? For all the process and maintenance engineers listening, here is your immediate action plan to survive 2026. First, physically inventory every single piece of cooling equipment and flag anything containing 15 pounds of charge or more. Second, check your state regulations first because they'll likely supersede any federal baselines. Third, mandate low GWP refrigerants under 700 for all new purchases moving forward. And fourth, strictly document your leak rates. You need defensible logs, which means digital records with exact timestamps, specific technician ID numbers, and automated calculations that eliminate human error.
Now, for the facility managers and capital planners, you have a parallel set of critical tasks. You must immediately quantify your financial penalty exposure by mapping your current charge sizes against those per-day penalties. Review your multi-state footprint to identify your strictest jurisdictions. You also need to re-baseline your capital replacement plans immediately. Remember, the AIM Act mandates an 85% phase down in HFC production by 2036. Buying a legacy, high GWP asset today means buying into a doomed supply chain where refrigerant replacement prices will inevitably skyrocket, turning your cheap chiller into a massive operating expense. Finally, audit your vendor contracts to legally require on-demand auditable documentation.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real bottom-line question regarding the inevitable shift to low GWP chillers. Are you moving on your own capital planning timeline or on a regulator's? The technology for low GWP chillers is mature, the historical performance gap is closed, and the path to transition is incredibly straightforward. The rumor that operators are getting a free pass through a reconsideration is just that, a dangerous myth. The shift is already here, so will you take control of your asset planning today or wait for a surprise auditor to force your hand tomorrow? Thanks for joining me today, and I highly encourage you to start those equipment inventories right away.